All right, gang, here's the final version of the composition that we'll be creating over the course of this chapter. And as you can see, we have these 3 floating spheres, each of which is wrapped in a variation of the metal chrome material that ships along with Photoshop CS5 Extended. Now, quite amazingly, I think, not only do each of the spheres reflect each other, but they also reflect the larger scene, and they reflect this guy in the foreground that we can't even see. Well, the guy and the text above him turn out to be behind us. And miraculously, Photoshop sees through us to the thing in back of us. Now, that may seem obvious. Of course, a machine cannot see us. But just trying to imagine capturing a reflected image using a camera, it's very difficult to make sure that either you as the photographer or the camera are out of the frame. But that kind of stuff is absolutely routine in the world of 3D. Now, the larger scene around us is a 4th mesh that's known as a spherical panorama, and there's this big sky and grass scene that's wrapped inside of that sphere. And let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to turn off everything but the 3D layer by Alt-clicking or Option-clicking on the eyeball in front of the scene layer here in the Layers panel. And I'm also going to turn off the layer mask by Shift-clicking on that layer mask there. The layer mask, by the way, is responsible for curtailing these aberrant masks that are cast upon the ground plane. Now, the reason I'm turning everything off is because it's going to make a lot more sense as we zoom in and out of the scene using the camera tool. So I'm going to click and hold on the camera tool here and select the 3D walk tool. And you may recall that you drag up in order to zoom into the scene like so, and you drag down to zoom out from the scene. And at a certain point right there, we're going to go out of the spherical panorama. So we just went through the wall of that larger sphere that holds the entire scene. And you can see here, wrapped onto the back of the sphere is that guy and the text. So that's what each one of those chrome spheres was seeing. Now we're rendering out that cast shadow on the ground plane. And of course, that doesn't make any sense outside of this large sphere, albeit it's kind of a squished sphere, as you can see here. So I'm going to go ahead and click to interrupt the render, and then I'll drag up in order to walk my way back into the scene. I'll walk through that wall. Now note that I still have my mouse button down, so we're not ray tracing the scene. And I want you to notice that ray tracing is not only responsible for shadows, but it's also responsible for reflections. Now you may take issue with that. You might say, I see reflections on each one of these spheres, but here's the thing. Those are actually environmental textures, which are another way of creating reflections in materials, and I'll explain how those work in a future exercise. But we're not seeing the guy, and we're not seeing the text, so we're not seeing the true reflection of the scene. As soon as I release, then the render begins, and at this point, you can see that the guy and the text and a different version of the reflection start appearing, as well as the shadows down here on the ground plane. Anyway, now the question becomes, how do we go about creating a spherical panorama? What I'd like you to do is go ahead and interrupt the render and then switch over to this image. It's called seamlessscene.psd, and it's found inside the 05 materials folder. Right now, we're only seeing the background image. It comes to us, by the way, from Galina and Drushko of the Fotolia image library, about which you can learn more at fotolia.com/geek. And it is, in fact, not a seamless panorama. In other words, it doesn't repeat seamlessly horizontally, which is something we need if we're going to be able to spin at leisure inside the scene. So let me show you what I'm talking about. With that background layer active, I'll go up to the filter menu, choose other, and choose this final command offset, which allows us to wrap the image around itself. So I've gone ahead and set the horizontal value to 1166 pixels. The reason being because that's half the overall image width. And so what's happening is we're shifting the image 1166 pixels to the right. And those pixels that get lost on the right-hand side of the image wrap back around onto the left-hand side of the image, and we see that seam right through the center. Now, it's an awfully big seam. It'll become a problem later. I just want you to know it's there. All right, go ahead and click on the cancel button if you're working along with me, because we're going to leave it alone for now. Now, I want you to go over to the Layers panel, and I want you to double-click on the name of the top layer. It's an adjustment layer that's called Brighten. I'm going to change its name, however, to Scene. The reason being that in just a moment, Photoshop's going to pick up the name of that top layer when it names the new 3D layer inside this composition. So now I'm going to shift-click on the background layer so that all of these layers, whether active or not, are selected. Then go up to the 3D menu, choose New Shape from Layer, and choose Spherical Panorama. And that will automatically go ahead and wrap this scene, all of these layers, in fact, inside of a large sphere. Now, we can't really see the sphere because, after all, we're locked inside of it, and we're very close to one of the walls at this point. If I switch to the orbit tool up here in the options bar, and then I drag down inside the image window, I'll see upward inside of my spherical panorama. If I want to look at something lower in the scene, then I'll go ahead and drag upward like so. And now I can see the horizon line. However, what I need to do in order to get this scene right is I need to position the 3D object, and I need to position this specific spherical panorama mesh. And normally what you do is just drag around with the various tools the way I showed you back in a previous chapter. However, to make quick work of things, I'm going to dial in a few numerical values. I advise you to do the same thing. That way we can just make some fast initial progress. So for starters, I want to set the angle of my camera. And I want to set the angle so we have a reasonable view of the ground plane. So might as well go to the View menu, choose Show, and then choose 3D Ground Plane in order to turn it on. And now here's the values I want you to enter. With one of the Rotate tools selected, either the Orbit tool or the Roll tool, go ahead and change the orientation values as follows. The X value should be -90. The Y value should be 0, which it is for me, and the Z value should be 90, which it also is for me. All right, now I want you to select either the Pan or the Walk tool here, once again in the options bar, and change the X value to something very large, 4130.8. And then go ahead and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. In my case, I went ahead and changed to 4130.7. That's not a significant difference, so it's not a problem. The Y value should be 414.7. That's fine. The Z value should be -2723. And then press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. And you'll end up seeing something like this, which is the back of the bottom edge of the panorama, and you can clearly see one of the seams. All right, so we've got the camera in place. Let's go ahead and save off that camera position by clicking on that disk icon. And I'm going to go ahead and call this guy Final View and click OK. And that way we can come back to this view anytime we like by selecting it from this pop-up menu. I should tell you that those saved camera angles are stored along with the document. They are not going to be made available to other documents that you work on inside of Photoshop, just FYI. All right, we still need to position the overall object, and we need to position the spherical panorama mesh as well, and we will do exactly that in the next exercise.